As employees return to offices, it is clear they expect the same flexibility and autonomy they enjoy whilst working from home. But hybrid work is not just about giving people flexible schedules. Hi, I'm Samantha Jam, and today I'm with Narita Cheah, co-founder of Paperspace, and we're going to talk a little bit more about flexibility and how you weave that into the workplace.
Hi, Samantha.
Hi, Narita. Welcome to our little podcast. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and about Paperspace.
Right. I'm Narita. I'm the co-founder of Paperspace. We are a very unique collective setup where we basically band together the A team depending on the projects and the problems we're trying to solve.
Excellent. This is where we want to start. The problem that we're trying to solve. I think a lot of clients today are rethinking, reimagining what might be the future of their workplace, the future of their employees, how they manage teams, how they continue to drive innovation and growth. And flexibility came up a lot in our research points, and how individuals and also as well as organizations have different expectations of the big word of called flexibility. What are you hearing from your clients?
So I think the pandemic has certainly changed the way people perceive how work will be done, for sure, and perhaps a different appreciation for life as well. And the way we sort of try to break down flexibilities in three components. One is the organization, which determines its policy. The other is space as a nudge to behaviors that we want to promote, and naturally technology would have to enable it. I think flexibility at its core, I think it's about giving people control for what they want to choose. But at the same time, I think the opposite end of flexibility is where we say, how do we bring people together when it matters most, is probably the biggest challenge most organizations are facing today.
So we know individuals and teams are looking for more control. And that's what the work from home experience was like. If you didn't like your home office, you could move things around, you could get more whiteboards. And so I think when employees come back to the office, their level of expectations has gone up. And what are some of the maybe new ways of relooking at giving employees that elevated experience at work?
Right. I think we're hearing a lot more that when people come back to work, I think we all recognize that they can do individual work fairly well remotely. I think it's when you have these instantaneous conversations or challenges, or you perhaps didn't even think about collaborating at that point, and you're stuck and you're trying to meet somebody and kind of bounce an idea off. I think those are the instantaneous bits that people are missing. And case to point, in terms of space, we naturally would advise clients to build 50 to 70% fixed infrastructure. So things like meeting rooms, cafes, those are hard to move around, they're very expensive. But then the other 30%, keep that flexible, because different teams, different people would sort of take time to evolve to work a certain way. And just giving this as an example, I love these miniatures because it just makes it a lot easier to talk about. Perhaps when a team's working together, I'd imagine that you would either be working side by side, talking to each other becomes a lot easier. I think when we're collaborating, if you brought a team component into the mix, say there was a conversation with other teams, naturally, I think we're seeing that the screens and the devices are becoming really key. I think this almost sort of rotates and gets people together, whether it's this or it's the board talking, and stools and people around that. I think that sort of setting is really key. And I think that has changed so much in the pandemic. We used to be so used to having screens mounted on the wall, it's fixed, and we're seeing things happening across the world, and this is all about flexibility. Is it by the desk? Is it two people working? Is it going to be a team sector where we need a few things coming together? That's where I think flexibility has to be sort of left to choice to people. But at the same time, I think there is a need to educate people for why they're here. How have this been responding to what they've been saying? Often we just put things there and expect some magic will happen, but it doesn't really happen that way. So a degree of communicating and telling them why is this here, how might you use it better, I think it's going to enhance the experience.
Yeah, I think the employee communications is such an interesting part because whilst we purposefully design kit or parts or technology that help people come together, work better together, it's not so obvious for a kind of employee to understand, okay, I can get the whiteboard and I'm allowed
Correct.
to use it. So
Correct.
it's interesting how employees might self-discover that on their own.
That's right. And I think these product ranges are really interesting because it really does provide flexibility. I think what we're doing and advising clients is try it out in maybe certain parts of the office space or maybe a specific area that you decide to maybe pilot and teach people how might you want to rotate some of these items around and more importantly measure what works and what doesn't. Because just because it works for this team, maybe the configuration might work very differently for another team.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think what you also highlight here was the flexibility, not really just for my individual needs, but as a team.
Correct.
What do we need that team to do in terms of flexibility? And we talk a lot about productivity software like Miro. You could collaborate very much on Zoom and Teams, whichever vehicle you would like to use. There's loads available. But coming to the office, still working with your teammates, having the option and the choice to put things up on the board, on the wall, it is still such an aid to solving problems.
Absolutely. I think the other thing to think about when we're thinking about planning and flexibility, I think the polarization of focus and collaboration needs to be a lot more distinctive now. So as much as I like to think like, this collaboration is great, people are sitting right here. If I was working, these guys were talking, it would drive me insane. I think maybe something that sort of has a bit of a boundary and a bit more distinctive for where the collaborative activity happens and where the focus work happens really needs to be quite intentional because acoustics, sound-wise, it's a lot more dimmed here, it's a lot more active here, and how might we use components like this to kind of really draw the different intentional behaviors?
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think there are so many more solutions today that that are very different from what you see in the pre-COVID environment. That flexibility is something that we built into a lot of design thinking in terms of the solutions we provide. And so shifting gear a little bit from the employee needs, because when you look at this kit of parts, it's a lot of products and
That's
it's
right.
a lot of solutions or inventory or that the company's assets that the company needs to manage. And organizations are struggling with this.
That's true.
And so how are you seeing organizations in terms of them signaling those needs, on their need for flexibility?
I think firstly, I love all this, bits and bobs and dealing with that. But at a much higher level, I think organizations are just challenged between what does that flexibility look like within the organizations, which starts to look very different, even between different business groups. I think once upon a time, the workplace sort of had a front of house and everything else at the back was the same.
Yeah.
We're seeing that even be a lot more different now. So I think a lot of organizations are there. And I think when there is acceptance and commitment between what the employee has said they wanted, what the organization said they will provide, I think they need to come hand in hand, and then these things will work well. Yeah.
That is so interesting. This tension, it's difficult.
It's real.
It's real and it's challenging.
Yes.
I think organizations in the past, it was a little bit like a cookie cutter approach. There's a lot more standardization
Correct.
in terms of design, even within the same company, as you mentioned.
Yes.
I don't know whether there are any tips or examples that you've seen from your clients who have done this quite well in managing this multitude of spaces, across different, real estate.
I think the managing of real estate as a facilities is very real. I mean, just these components alone is like, 20 SKUs, and you take it across the organization, that's 2,000, 5,000 parts. And I think my recommendation on that is maybe take things in baby steps. I think options are great, but maybe focus on top 3 most important things. If that's the workspace, and how are we going to enhance it to be better? Is it going to be height adjustable? Should we have better monitor arms? And then really sort of think about that. And as we go into the collaboration mode, again, maybe bring 1, 2 things that we feel are right and get people to maybe vote. What's worked really well in a recent project of ours was giving the choice to the people. We can all make the best choices with products, but I think when we bring the actual things to the site, we get people to cast votes because all are as good. I think there's a certain sense of ownership for this is our office and not what you tell me it's going to be and it's the best for me. I think that's worked really well.
I think the sense of belonging also comes with that ownership, right?
Correct.
Having a say, having an input, a feedback loop in terms of what is working. How would you sort of see hybrid impacting the notion of flexibility? I guess as policy shifts up and down, let's say, for example, if hybrid policies were increasing in percentage, more and more people are working in unassigned spaces. In many organizations, they are practicing policies like activity-based work for many, many years.
Yes.
Do you see that as a different sort of challenge to the organization?
I think the challenge now is for leaders. I think you can say we would like you to come into the office at a minimum of 50%, 60%, and people are saying less about days. They kind of bring it down to percentage because you have choice between time and day. The other more pressing thing that's needed now for leaders is when people come back, how are they starting to make those coming back sessions meaningful? If people are going to come back and sit at the desk and do what they used to do at home, I think they're going to be very frustrated and say, why am I here exactly? And we've seen the more progressive companies or teams saying, we'll have a 2-hour team meeting and then we sort of dovetail that with lunch. And then you guys are free to sit and work in your space or do whatever it is. And there is a natural tendency for people to stay on and find those sort of instantaneous at-work conversations that they completely had forgotten about.
I think that's a great example. I know that many organizations would have, let's say, a team meeting weekly. Stand up in the office. That exactly to your point, food to bring people together.
Absolutely.
And having a stand-up session, maybe there is already content where you left off the previous week on the walls that you can touch base on, and then have a little lunch together, so that social component is still what glues the team together. Are you seeing more flexible usage of social spaces beyond the kind of focus and collaboration space?
Social spaces have become the most important spaces. I think social spaces, multi-purpose, enclosed, large facilities, sort of married together, is key. It's almost, you need to design it for 50 shades of possible events. Small events, workshops, team meetings, sales partner meetings, clients coming in. And in an office that we recently just completed, it's almost literally only 70% completed. They've done 10 different events in a place like that because that's what draws people back and realize the meaning of coming back together to do something together, because that's what's going to draw people back and not just sort of dictate number of days.
Yeah, I think that's what we're hearing as well in terms of getting inspiration for social spaces, drawing inspiration from hospitality, restaurants, even co-working to a degree, folding back into that space in the office. And in parts of Steelcase, I know some of our spaces actually have their own chefs, their own kitchen, and even in the Singapore showroom, we've done a few cooking sessions together as teams, and that really helps to bring people together. That social component should never be underestimated.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's the starting point. It's not the end point. I think the social component sort of then layered in with content of any different forms, I think is the starting point where people say there is meaning in coming together. Because when you have a big sort of come together, the people sort of find their own tribes, you could say, and then they kind of find their way to continue, whether that's a personal conversation or it's a work conversation. That's what really people want to come back for, right?
Yeah, it's the old water cooler moment.
That's right.
That's what we're all missing.
Exactly.
So that's I think all settings within the office really needs level of built-in flexibility.
Absolutely.
That enables individuals, teams, and definitely within the organization. And so what's next for Paperspace? So what is keeping you busy as lots of our companies are looking into reinventing their spaces?
We're finding ourselves spending so much more time now upfront, engaging across organizations, from leaders to middle managers who are the enablers and teams, to actually try to find out from the organization, for the organization, what is it that the vision of the project looks like from the people. What does that space now tend to look like, and then sort of carry that through to design, but more importantly, to continue to engage the people and say, remember, this is what you said, and continuing to kind of fill them in on how we're getting to the end point. Because very often we engage and people are excited and they're like, what's next? And they're like, we'll come back to you, but then we don't, and then it's built and you're supposed to be really excited about it. I think more and more organizations realize that you have to kind of communicate all the time at different levels, right? To help people understand there's so many parts that's gone into consideration for you to appreciate that and understand.
That's really fascinating, that the voice of the employee
Yes.
is more important and more heard than ever before. And let's talk a little bit more about the facility side of things. In the past, we have a lot of built architectural elements. And I think now, as organizations are again uncertain and shaping their policies, the number of meeting rooms,
Yes.
big, small,
Yes.
the number of breakout spaces are things kind of in flux. So is that something that clients should really be thinking about as they do this level of investment and commitment to build spaces?
There's a lot in flux, and we've developed a prototype model of looking over quite a few projects from smallest to biggest to understand the matrix of space that makes certain organizations work differently from others. We've adopted it as a baseline for clients to say, you seem to be this sort of office persona, these are the kit of parts that would support you. And that's just the baseline. And naturally, companies have sort of embarked on it, and it does work on two fronts, right? One is understanding the why this kit of parts works for me, and then educating their teams as to why and how to use it. I think we've seen a lot of success there. On the larger organizations, I think we need to be sensitive with the economic climate that we are in now, and our advice on that is to pilot. Pilot with teams that have a lot of potential. Go big or go home. Make it an amazing experience that people will say, why would I not want this,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So sort of invest in a very specific location to create that impact rather than dilute and make small changes which nobody will see or appreciate.
Fantastic. And I think another trend that we are seeing is co-working. That's another level of flexibility. We hear many organizations, and as we see the proliferation of many more co-working offices, do you see this as a kind of pendulum swinging? And sometimes clients, they are happy to go for that flexibility, and sometimes they prefer to have their own corporate offices.
That's such a very big pendulum actually in the co-working. We've seen some companies who've deployed co-working really very much as their satellite offices, and they trust that people will know where to go, which co-working to go to meet their people and their tribe. Some people just like co-working in some companies because this is even better than my office. I like the experience over here. So I think it really depends what the organization's objective is about. Some see it as a great starting point when from a certain size. We have a client now that says, it's great, but we cannot be ourselves.
Yes.
So there are limitations to that as well when the company grows.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, that balance between having the investment flexibility and then when to say, okay, we need a place to call home,
Yes.
a place to call our own brand, our own culture, and then having employees feel a sense of belonging.
Correct.
And you know, you mentioned satellite offices. You know, of course, in Singapore, it's a fairly small country to travel, and but certainly, you know, from your experience in other projects, maybe outside of Singapore, do you see more companies investing in satellite offices beyond the sort of CBD area?
That's an interesting one. I think Singapore is probably one of the easiest cities to commute to and fro and between. But it is also the most, quite an advanced city in the context of the region in terms of deploying new ways of working. I don't think we've seen that so much from other countries where the government, for example, has sort of mandated or suggested that 4-day working weeks would be better. Decentralized model as a city would be the way forward, because at the end of it, it is underpinned by sustainability. Sustainability in the way we commute, sustainability in the way our cities will continue to you know, look after everyone. And I think we are seeing that more in Singapore, these new ways of testing, experimenting new things, than we are seeing other locations.
Yeah, thanks, Narita, for joining us today. Do you have any last, you know, big takeaway for our audience today on the topic of flexibility?
I think that it's a big, hairy word, flexibility, but I think at the core of it, it's really quite simple. I think it's about getting people to come together to voice, and not so much voice, maybe they even need to find what that flexibility looks like for their team and not just the individual. And only then can we sort of uncover how spaces, culture, policy sort of marry up to that. So thank you. It's been
Thank
lovely.
you for joining us.
It's been lovely being here.